Welcome back to the weight room. Thanks for joining us for another great podcast. It's going to be a fantastic conversation with my new friend, Rayne Gray. But before we get started, go check out his podcast, subscribe to it, and then don't forget to subscribe to the weight room. Other than that, enjoy the podcast. Yeah. But anyway, so...
Yeah, should we get going?
Yeah, I guess so. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day and joining us here in the weight room. Appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you, spending some time today and sharing a little bit of that wisdom that we talked about a little earlier and some experience and all that good stuff. And definitely, if you haven't checked out his podcast, check it out. We'll talk about that later a little bit, and we'll definitely put the links and stuff in the description, but top-notch content, great guest, great host. I mean, awesome stuff. Even if you're not into the whole, firefighting and all that stuff, you really don't have to be at all. It's just a really, really good podcast. So definitely check that out. But thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, Daniel, thank you for your kind words. And thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the other side of the microphone for a change. It's an honor for me. So yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Definitely. It's an honor to have you on. And first of all, thank you for your service just throughout your whole life,
Well, it's my pleasure. And, I always get a little uncomfortable when people say that, because it's been such an opportunity for me. It's been a growth opportunity. It's been a privilege that for me to serve in all these different capacities. And so it makes me a little uncomfortable when people thank me. I'm like, no, I should be thanking you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this. So yeah, but thanks for saying so. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if you just want to, I guess, start off with a little bit of an introduction on, who you are.
Yeah, well, let me reverse out, I guess. So I'm currently a battalion chief with a major metropolitan fire department in the southwestern United States, rhymes with Phoenix, and been with the Phoenix Fire Department for 23 years, and love it. Greatest job ever. Absolutely love it. Before that, served for some time in the Marine Corps. Being a tanker is a amazing place to serve. You get to do all kinds of cool stuff and to get to ride everywhere you're going. So that's kind of cool. Prior to that, grew up in the Northwest, and Vancouver, British Columbia, and in Canada. So my parents are from the States. I'm dual citizen, which I will say now, being a dual citizen has yet to provide any benefits to me, but I get to fly that flag, which is kind of fun. So for what it's worth. Growing up in the Northwest was a ton of fun. And now that I live down here in the Southwest in Arizona, I can't imagine the clouds and the rain that I grew up in now that it's sunshine 360 days a year for the most part. I don't know the difference. I don't know what I would do with that.
I can't imagine that weather just all year round would be fantastic.
I always joke around and say, hey man, as hot as it gets here in the summertime, and it can be a little bit miserable at times, but in the wintertime, you don't have to shovel sunshine, my friend. And there's something about not having to get specially dressed just to go outside.
Absolutely.
I do not miss that. I lived in Toronto for 4 years in right before high school, junior high school, and wicked cold and deep snow and freezing weather. And I really cherish those memories, but I don't look for opportunities to go live there again right now, as much as it was enjoyable at the time. As a kid, living in weather like that, it was a non-issue, right? I had friends that ran around in soccer shorts all year round, and but I remember my mom, going out to the car with a boiling tea kettle because the freezing rain had frozen over the car, and she had to, boil the car out so she could go to work. And she's got her snow boots on with a dress and her high heels in one hand and a boiling tea kettle in the other. And I look back on that memory and think, being an adult in that kind of situation, I can't even fathom trying to get your kids ready and get them to school and get up in the morning and leave for work in the dark and come home for, you've got 1 hour of dark and then 1 hour of light and then it's dark again. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a whole different lifestyle.
Getting back into kind of the military, your military experience, how did you get interested in that? What really kind of pushed you in that direction?
So honestly, and this is, I felt like I didn't have a lot of other choices. Now, this is born out of insecurity. So as a young man, I struggled with school and didn't get a lot of positive reinforcement in school, and really, or a lot of positive experiences. And so by the time my senior year came around, I'm watching all these other friends and kids go off to college, and they're going to this college and that college. And, we didn't have the financial means, and I didn't have the grades to think that that was an option. And so I had this sense of self that I didn't have any other options. And so one day I'm sitting on campus and I watch this Marine recruiter come swaggering across campus. And I looked at that guy and I'm like, man, freaking look at that. That guy looks good. What's he doing, right? What's that all about? And he came over and he's like, all right, boys, what are you guys doing after high school? And everyone's like, oh, I'm going to this college and that college. And I'm sitting there going, well, I do not know what I'm going to do. And he zoomed in on me like a vulture and, showed me what the world could look like. And so I saw a lot of attractive opportunities there. And because I wasn't ready to just jump into adult life, I didn't have a plan like everyone else seemed to have. And it gave me an opportunity to have a plan. And so I went in and I'm trying to remember what my contract was, but it wasn't an open contract. It was combat arms, which is sort of an open-ended technical field. And I ended up in tanks. And when I got into boot camp, I will tell you, it was exactly as the promo videos kind of suggested. And if you watch the opening 20-30 minutes of Full Metal Jacket, that movie does a pretty good depiction of what boot camp looks like. It is there to strip you down of your civilian behaviors and accoutrements and mindset, and set you on a path really structured by team and structured by this collective mission. And that really, I will tell you, that really fell right in line with a lot of what felt good to me, what felt right. Coming out of high school, I didn't really have a vision of what my life would look like and who I wanted to be. I just knew that I wanted to be in a place where I would be doing something for other people. That's the only thing. It was a very kind of squishy and ambiguous idea that I had, and I didn't know what that looked like exactly. But I'm like, well, going into the military is a form of service, and that to me was a noble and an admirable thing to do. And so that was the attraction.
It's really cool to have the mindset of wanting to do something for others, to have that side of it is, I think, a really cool thing from that age. And another thing I think is really interesting is when you said, kind of stripping you down of that civilian kind of mindset and lifestyle and everything.
Well, it's I don't know where it came from exactly, but I do remember an experience I had with my dad. My dad, oddly, this is a whole separate podcast, but my dad was not what I would not consider the model father, but he did instill upon me this idea that work, the things that you do could be for other people. So he was an actor and a musician. And one of the things that he told me was that he enjoyed helping the audience feel something, to emote, right? To feel this emotion. And I remember thinking, that's kind of weird. Like you're there to make people laugh or make them cry or make them feel something. And I had several experiences as a young adult where people responded, I wasn't acting, where people responded to me positively because of something I had done. And I think that's where that came from, where I realized that, I can be out here in life and I can influence people or do something for somebody and make them feel a certain way, make them feel happy, or bring them joy, or bring them service that takes them to another place, right? That gives them something for their lives, right? I'm kind of losing my sense there, but that mindset, I saw that. So I played high school football, and I remember on the football field being able to encourage my fellow footballers, right? Being able to get out there and encourage them. And we were in a team organized to accomplish a certain goal. And I could help move that forward by serving my brothers on the football field, right? And that translated super well into the military, right? And I do remember, I'll give you a really interesting example. Marine Corps boot camp is all about like I said, them stripping you down and the drill instructor providing direct instruction and you following that direct instruction, right? It's, if they tell you to jump, it's how high, right? So that kind of made sense to me, right? On the football field, you would turn to your fellow player and you're like, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what I need to do. And then we would go, or the coach would yell, or the team captain would provide that instruction, right? So same kind of thing. So I remember one day I was in a position in boot camp where it was called the guide, which I was sort of like the platoon leader as a fellow recruit. And in this position, I was responsible for getting head counts and making sure everyone was where they needed to be. And I'm sure I had a lot more responsibilities, but that's really the stress. And that's what I remember at this point was every time we'd run out to formation, I'd have to do a head count. And one day the drill instructor stops me and the whole entire platoon is out standing in formation. And he's got me on the quarter deck, which is a giant kind of concrete area on the front of the barracks. And that's where we spent a lot of time doing physical remediation. So he starts to remediate me and he says, why can't you control the platoon? And I immediately went to a very like tactile thing. I'm like, I am not with them. I am in here. They are out there. And I began to understand as we exercised up and down, push-ups, jumping jacks, bends and thrusts, and suddenly a pool of sweat has formed underneath me. And every time he stops me, he says, he looks over my shoulder at the platoon that's standing out in the San Diego sun. And they're fidgeting around because there's nobody with them out there. There's no supervision. There's nobody. And he says, oh, so-and-so moved, push. Oh, so-and-so scratched their ass, push. And I started to lose it. I'm like, I don't know how to do this, right? Here I am, 18 years old, and I'm supposed to control the 100 guys that are standing outside. And it dawned on me that the role of leader, the role of the influence that we can have on people needs to be, it's not always hand over hand. I'm not directly there to provide service to somebody. We can have service. You can control and lead people in other ways, right? By providing that example, by making sure expectations are clear and concise and are well depicted. And so my point of bringing that up is this idea that we can be of service to those around us. We can lead people from whatever position we're in is a real thing. And that was this really kind of squishy and ambiguous thing for me prior, as I was kind of coming out of high school. I wanted to be in a position where I could help influence, where I could provide service to the people around me. And it began to take shape as I, fell into those leadership opportunities and roles and started to see what leadership could look like in those different positions. So I hope that example makes some kind of sense.
Did you see any difference between those who had that kind of like sporting high school sports background versus those who didn't? Any like leadership or something like that, teamwork differences?
Yeah, what I would say is that the young men that I was surrounded by who had played high school sports, who had been on teams, were a little bit more accustomed to getting yelled at. And I know that seems like a silly little thing, but getting that direct coaching, which is the only I can call it, versus a more subtle, nurturing kind of encouragement, right? It's a different type of model. And it's a little bit unnerving and shocking when you first get it. And I don't know, I think that people adjust pretty quickly. I think most of the folks that signed up to get in the Marine Corps had a clue what they were getting themselves into, I think, and were quickly tuned into it. Not everybody was very receptive to it, which I think is an interesting thing, because you know what you're getting into, you know what you're about, and about to be faced with, and yet some folks would get in there and completely cavitate. And I don't understand how they weren't prepared for that, other than it just was at a level they just didn't quite expect, right? So that's a weird thing. But I think there were definitely some folks that were not ready for that.
Kind of like to the same point you said, you should know what to expect. Why did you kind of get into it if you didn't really, have the intentions of sticking with it? Which I don't have that experience, but just coming from, him and then coming from you, it's kind of funny hearing that same message.
Yeah. Well, what I would add to that is I think that in today's day and age, there's so much available information on the internet, right? You should have a pretty eyes wide open understanding of what you're getting into. But what I will add to that is I think that sometimes we don't have the experience to know how we're going to respond. So we think, oh yeah, I'll be able to handle this. Like I'm good to go, right? This will not be a problem for me until you're faced with it. And so let me take you back to my experience on the quarterdeck. So I'm standing there, and these multiple drill instructors are freaking chewing me up and thrashing me. I was there for about 45 minutes, which I don't think is legal. But they're trashing me, and there's literally a puddle of sweat on the floor. I finally got to a point where I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to control these men who are standing outside when I'm standing in here. And a single tear broke loose and ran down my cheek. And I'm just freaking, I'm so angry. This tear broke loose, and the drill instructor got my face and he says, "Are you crying?" And I'm, "Sir, no, sir." "You're crying." "No, sir." And he's like, "Listen." And then he knew he had me. He had my attention, right? Fully and completely unfettered. And he said, "You need to figure out how to lead these men." And I'm like, okay, I guess that's my mandate, right? Go forth and figure this out. But it was interesting because I thought I was good to go. I can take this. I can take whatever. But everybody has a threshold, and you don't know what that is and how you're going to respond. You don't know what your mind is going to do. And, you talk about like Navy SEAL type stuff, and, everybody reaches a point where you've made a decision where you're going to continue on, or you're just going to be like, yeah, when they give you an option to bow out, you're like, yeah, that sounds like the right thing to do today, because you just don't have any more in you. And so, and I can't speak specifically to that, but I've had some experiences that have been where I've had to make a decision, and that, we do have a real opportunity at some point to just bow out sometimes. And that's a real test of what's between your ears.
That's the whole thing right there, is the mental side of things is so important, and you can't get around it in anything you do, no matter what it is, school, business, military, first responders, like, just everyday life decisions. It's all about what goes on in your mind and your brain. And part of that's, experience, like you said, part of that is, training your mind. And part of that is attitude. What we talk about here on the weight room a lot actually is it's a very overlooked side of things. We often think about the physical side, how can I get best in shape physically, but the mental side is, and it's definitely, I think, becoming a bigger problem, as in the culture that we're creating and we've created. And just with all the the mental health stuff that is going on, which, obviously not here to judge. I'm just, bringing it up because it has become, such a big thing that maybe it's something that we need to take a closer look at, as far as, we're doing great. A lot of people are doing great with the physical side of things, but that, like you said, that mental side is where it all goes, or where it all takes place, really.
Yeah. You bring up a really interesting point, which I like to consider the differential between purpose and motivation. If you have a real purpose behind what you're doing, then you will always have the motivation. And motivation can be a very fleeting thing, right? Sometimes I'll get on YouTube and I'll watch a montage from Rocky or something like that, and I'm pumped. I'm motivated. I'm like, I could go out and hit the gym and lift the world or run miles, right? But the problem is when you get into the pain cave and things begin to get real, suddenly you're asking yourself, why am I doing this? Right? Why am I even here? And I think back to multiple different points in my life where I had to make a decision. I asked myself that question: why in the F am I doing this thing that is so freaking uncomfortable right now? And making it, and then remembering, hey, you decided to do this for this reason. And there's a specific example that's coming to my mind, if you don't mind my sharing. So I mentioned to you before that I race ultra marathons and long distance triathlons and stuff like that. And I haven't done any in a long time, which is a whole other story. But back in the day, I was doing my very first Ironman, and I had trained for a year to do this thing. And, I had gotten into long distance running. I've been a runner since I was a little kid, and really got into long distance running as I was in the Marine Corps, as you might imagine. And then out of the Marine Corps, really just kept on going. Anyway, here I am on the back half of the marathon, and I am starting to fall apart. I made some nutritional mistakes, ate too much, didn't drink enough, got dehydrated, and I'm working my way through the marathon. I'm starting to have cramps in places that I didn't think I had muscle fiber. Okay, there's cramps inside like the belly of my pelvis and all kinds of crazy places. Anyway, it was very uncomfortable, and I'm walking. I'm like halfway through the marathon, and now I'm walking. And in my mind, I had this vision of me finishing this thing in like 9.5 hours. And I'm realizing now that I might finish it. Right. And I think the cutoff is 15 hours and 59 minutes. And I'm thinking, man, I just got to keep moving. I just got to keep moving. And my wife, who had been, popped up on different parts of the course throughout the day, shows up with my brother-in-law in the car on the very back half of this marathon. And she gets out, and she's 7 months pregnant, and cutest little thing with her sundress and her big sun hat. And she comes out and she's waddling along with me, and I'm barely moving. I'm trying to walk, and every time I take a step, I'm fired off with cramps, etc. You get the point. And she says, "Hey, how are you doing?" I said, I'm not doing good. I'm really hurting. I'm really in pain. And she's like, "Okay, good. I'll see you at the finish line." And she got back in the car and she left. Right. And in that time, I thought to myself, hey, I should just get in the car. I could leave right now. Like, this could all come to an end. But I had to remember, hey, I made a decision to come out here and do this. I had a reason. Right now, that reason escapes me. But I said I was going to do this thing. I trained for a year, and I am going to finish this Ironman. And, I hobbled along and I made it, and I finished in 12 hours and 30 minutes, I think was my finish time. Which is not horrible. It's certainly not what I had set the objective for, but I finished it, right? And the most important thing, there's a couple of takeaways for me, right? The most important thing was that I recognized that I said I was going to complete this thing, and I continued to mentally, I stayed focused and stayed on my objective, right? There's, the other thing is, here I have this life companion who came out on the course with me, and even in my most difficult moment was encouraging and wasn't willing to let me quit. She could have said, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you get in this car? You're going to do too much damage. You're hurting yourself." Nope. She knew that I was still in a good place and wanted to encourage me, so she did, right? And so I look at endurance sports, and I look at some of these things, and I look at the mindset that we have to have, right? And if I had just watched a Rocky video and said, I'm going to go run Ironman, that would not have sustained me. But I recognized that my purpose was I really wanted to achieve this thing. And I had set that out there and trained for a year and made that my focus. And nobody was going to deter me from that, right? It wasn't about motivation. It was about having my own purpose and willingness to do that. The reason I bring that up is because when you talk about going to the weight room and people are like, "Oh, I want to lose a couple inches," or "I want to be fit for summer. I want to look good in my bathing suit." That's a pretty fleeting objective, right? For me personally, I look at my life and say, there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be things that get in my way. What is my ultimate objective? Well, as a 50-year-old man, right, I look at my life and I'm like, my objective is to be healthy and strong and robust on the Fireground. My objective is to be able to take my grandkids that I don't have yet, but someday I'm going to have grandkids, to be able to crawl around on the ground and take them on hikes and take them backpacking. Like, that is a greater purpose. So when I go to the gym, I think about these grandkids that someday I'm going to have, and they need their grandfather to be robust and healthy. And so every time I have a setback, I think, okay, what's my real purpose here, right? Am I trying to be an Adonis? That's a good side effect, but the reality is I'm trying to be healthy and robust so that I can do all the fun things in my life that I want to do, right? And you had asked me a question a while back offline about the things that I enjoy doing in life, right? And getting in the weight room and training is one of them, but that's really that is really objective driven for me. It's about, so I train jiu-jitsu, and I do lots of hiking and backpacking with my kids and my young adults. And so I'm in the weight room so that I can do those things, right? I'm in the weight room so that I can get on the Fireground and wear all my gear and not fall out, right? And stay strong and robust and healthy and be able to hike up the stairs, carry some tools, and do my job and be effective. Right. So, yeah, it's about having purpose.
Yeah.
Purpose drives your behaviors.
Absolutely. And man, just that whole story of the race that took me back to, I've only done one marathon, but I did it. I did it 2 years ago, I guess now. But man, I could completely see myself in your shoes, just going through and losing, going probably, I don't know, on mile 15, 16, 17, 18, around there, when, you've done, when you've done, you're just like, okay, I feel like I'm, I've done a lot. So, is it okay to give up, or is it, what I'm saying? Like, that thought crosses your mind. And, I didn't give myself enough time to train, and I recognize that. So I was thinking, I've done good for what I've accomplished so far. And all these things are running through my mind. And then, you just have that higher purpose of, no, I'm going to get this thing done. And like you said, just the cramping and the feeling like you're all alone out there. And it's just like a crazy experience. It's definitely like no other experience I've ever had, as far as just, it's literally all in your own head, because your legs will keep moving. You just have to convince yourself that, why you started is still worth, keeping up the next step.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting too is in like, I've never done an open road marathon. I've done Ironman, which is probably the closest thing, with all kinds of people out there. And, I think it was like mile 8 or so of the marathon. Some dude offered me a shot of tequila. Like, there's people out there. Right. And, I started doing, ultra marathons, in the wilderness. And that was a different one, because I found myself alone for hours and hours and hours. And, it's interesting. You really have to have a sense of why you're there. Otherwise, it's easy to just get in your head and dismantle yourself, dismantle your purpose, and dismantle your reason for being there if it's not anchored in real good. So I think there's a lot of exercise that you can do prior to getting out there, mentally exercising, doing visualization and things like that, so that when you attack that inevitable feeling of despair that comes over you when you're really hurting and you've still got 25 miles to go. How do you get through that? Well, you have to have some positive self-talk and some ability to work yourself through those difficult situations, right? And or an ability, I'll use a Jockoism, right? An ability to detach from the moment and think about the broader perspective. When I think about it in terms of, in terms of firefighting, you're going to run into obstacles. And if you get so task focused, you can lose sight of the broader perspective. It's a very similar type of thing. And it happens to us, even in school. I went back, after, I told you I barely made it out of high school. I've since gone back and worked my way through college and got myself a graduate degree. And I remember writing my thesis and looking at the blank page with the cursor and thinking, there is no way, right? The hung up on the self-doubt and the lack of self-confidence that was bred, that I had adopted over the years and allowed to seep into my being. I'm looking at this cursor blinking at me and I'm thinking, how in the hell am I ever going to accomplish this monumental task? And then I have to step back and go, okay, what's the big picture here? What's my objective? My objective is to accomplish this degree. This is a small part. My objective is to be an effective fire officer someday and to have some knowledge, skills, and abilities that are going to help me be effective, right? To lead my family and to be an excellent, employee for the city. Okay, this little thing, this paper that I got to write, this 100-page thesis, is really a small step in all that. So let's chunk it. Let's break it down into its component parts, right? Start with the thesis question. What's the question? Okay, break it down into some subcomponent. Anyway, you get my point, right? Chunk it into these little doable parts. But I had to step away from the overwhelming emotion of, hey man, you can't do this. So that was super helpful to me. And when I realized, there's so many times I've looked back on my time in the Marine Corps, I look back on my Ironman and I go, hey, you've done hard things, man. You got this. Yeah. So step back, detach from the emotion.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a cool dichotomy when you think about, like, you have to step back and detach from it, but at the same time, making it into smaller, achievable goals is also something. Detach from it. Step back, 3,000 foot view, but at the same time, like almost making it a one sentence view, like every sentence I'm just accomplishing each sentence as I go. Don't think about the 100 pages I have to do, even though that's definitely the goal. Think about, how am I going to get this next paragraph done? That's all that really matters right now.
This thing fits right into everything we're talking about, right? I'm running mile 33 on a trail, and I'm starting to break down for whatever reason, blisters on my feet, my nutrition's bad. I know that I can recover from this, right? So I'm going to run to that next tree, and then I'm going to reassess. Or I'm going to look at my watch and go, I'm going to run 5 more minutes and we'll reassess. I'll quit in 5 minutes. Let me go for 5 more minutes. And there's been times I'm in the weight room and I'm like, I do not want to do the next set because that heavy squat is going to freaking be miserable and it hurts and I'm tired and I just want to get out of the gym at this point. Okay, do 1 more set and then you can quit. Right?
Yeah.
So you just chunk it. And it's, on one hand, it could be a mind game, but I think that we all have to have tools. And that's part of it is building the tools that allow you to get where you're trying to go.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely one of the big reasons why I've always, when I say always, I mean the last, I don't know, since beginning of college, I kind of started doing it, listening to more podcasts, reading more books, just trying to gain a little bit more perspective on how to do that kind of thing. So definitely would be, one of my recommendations for anybody out there who just kind of has questions about what to do is just start learning from other people. So
absolutely.
So kind of getting back into, we were talking about your military time, and let's talk a little bit about, how long did you stay in the military, and then, what made you get out of the military? Why did you decide to get out?
So I did 4 years, and I went in September of '90, right as the Gulf War was kicking off, and and so we went. It escalated, and then it de-escalated really fast, and then we were in a peacetime period, and Clinton came in office, and they started to downsize a tiny bit, and so the opportunities began to shrink a little bit. So I had met and married my sweetheart in San Diego, and we got moved out to 29 Palms, which is, if you've never had the pleasure of being out in 29 Palms, I will describe it as a desert wasteland. So it's an amazing gun range and for dropping bombs and shooting cannons and all that kind of jazz. But as far as raising a family and living a life out there, it's not the best. So my wife and I were a young married couple, and she really wanted to go to school, and I was beginning to warm up to the idea of going to school. And so at the end of my 4-year tour, we had discussed the possibility of staying in and what that might look like. And we just made a decision that we weren't going to be able to go to school. The military, like I said, the Marine Corps specifically was beginning to restrict some transfers into other occupations and things like that. And so it just became less savory to stick around. And so with my skills as a tank commander, which have limited application in the civilian world, in case anybody's wondering, we decided to get out, and we moved to Arizona to be close to family and go to school. And that's how we ended up out here in the Southwest. So yeah. And you know what? And that, again, I still did not know what I was going to do with my life. And I just knew that it was time to take a step and do something else. And yeah.
Gotcha. So yeah, just from listening to your podcast, I kind of picked up on, it took you a little bit longer, and you had some jobs along the way before you got into the world of firefighting. Were any of those, life lessons learned or anything come from those?
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, well, let me see. I'll run down them real quick because they're all short jobs. So did construction for a year. I worked retail in a couple different locations. My favorite of which was REI. Are you familiar with REI?
I'm not.
Recreational Equipment Incorporated. They sell like camping and climbing and yeah. So it's a fun place to work. I'll just say that much. Great company and a fun place to work. And then I took a job with Wells Fargo Bank because I thought that I needed a shirt and tie to be successful in life. And it was this weird idea I had in my head. I couldn't wear my Birkenstocks and wool socks that I was rocking at REI. That was not going to be the pathway to my future. So I took this job with Wells Fargo Bank, and as much as I really enjoyed doing construction because I was outside and, it was very physical, which is super enjoyable, but I didn't see that. I didn't see the long-term personal opportunities there. And it didn't really fire me up. And then working retail, I really enjoyed being around people, especially at REI, because people would come in, they're buying camping supplies, they're going on journeys across the country, across the world, and you get to help outfit these people. It was a lot of fun. And, but it just wasn't very financially rewarding. And so I was kind of like, okay, well, good customer service experience, that's fun, but it's not financially rewarding. So I took this job with the bank and I thought, okay, it'll be some customer service, it'll be financially rewarding. And, no offense to bankers out there, but man, it is just not the job for me. I hated it with every fiber of my being. And interestingly, a friend of mine who I worked at REI with got hired on with the local fire department. And I suddenly stepped back and realized that, that there have been little markers throughout my life where other people like that kind of pointed toward the fire service. And she got hired on. So I immediately called her up and I said, hey, tell me more about the job at the fire department. And so she starts telling me about it. And I'm realizing that you get to work outside. It's very physical. The environment is super variety of the environments you're working in. You have to use your brain as well as your brawn. You get to help people in their darkest hours. And I'm like, man, this sounds like a fantastic fit for me. And I will go back real quick and say, when I was in the Marine Corps, I volunteered with the Joshua Tree National Park in their search and rescue program. I was doing a lot of rock climbing at the time. So I went and got my EMT, my emergency medical technician license or certificate, and in SoCal, and was using that doing search and rescue. And so I had a little taste of it, right? That was one little benchmark. I had a platoon sergeant who came in one day looking like he had been, held, like death warmed over. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I volunteered with the Morongo Valley Fire Department. And we had a fire last night. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Dismissed it, right? My high school buddy, his father was an LA City fireman. And I remember coming in and he would tell us stories about, some of the things that happened on the Fireground, right? Dismissed it, didn't really think about it. It was just these different little benchmarks in my life. So when I finally heard this friend of mine say, yeah, I got hired on the fire department, and she's telling me how it's a real career opportunity, I suddenly was like, all these different experiences I had flooded in. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is something I need to pursue. And then from that point forward, I was like a dog on a bone. I could not let the idea go. I was probably not the best employee at the bank I was working at, because I was so focused on getting out of there and becoming a firefighter at that point that I was a worthless employee. So I apologize to Wells Fargo Bank for my lack of diligence during that time period, but it worked me out of the system, so it's good for them.
There you go.
So I had an experience. So it's funny, as these things started to line up, I immediately turned and I looked back at an experience I had when I was in high school. So my senior year, middle of my senior year, a buddy of mine and I are out for a run on Christmas Eve. And I'll try to make this story brief because it can be voluminous. So we're out running on Christmas Eve. And that tells you a little bit about how big of losers we were, right? Our lives were pretty pathetic. But football season was over. Track season was coming up. We needed to stay in shape. So that's what we were doing. So we're running up this long hill in our neighborhood, and it tees at the top. And as we're cresting the hill, we hear an explosion and glass breaking, and we look up and we can see a house at the end of the street with fire just rolling out of the second story. And we both split. He goes down one side of the street, I go down the other. We're pounding on doors. Call the fire department, call the fire department. And we rendezvous in front of the house. And there's a little boy, probably 7 or 8 years old, standing there staring up at the fire. And I grab him by the shoulders and I look him in the face and I said, hey, is there anybody in the house? And he's yeah, my dad is in the house. So Nick and I run into the backyard, hop the pool fence, go into the kitchen area. And this was my very first time ever being in a house that was on fire, right? So again, the memory is super crystal clear in my mind. And it's interesting because I've had, however many hundreds of fires since that time. But I walk in and the whole downstairs is filled with a light haze of smoke. and the smoke detector is going off, and there's a TV on, and there's just all these things that are happening, and immediately scream into the house, is there anybody in the house? No response. So Nick and I go separate directions, and we end up at the bottom of the stairs, and tried to go up the stairs. And by the time my head hit the floor level, my face began to melt off. It was super hot, and we get forced back down. And Nick shows back up with a wet towel, because everybody knows if you put a wet towel over your mouth, you can suffer any kind of heat. So I throw the wet towel over my mouth, and I go a couple steps up the stairs. And again, I'm like, this isn't going to happen. It's too freaking hot. So run back down, and Nick and I start to head out. And Nick goes out the back door. And as Nick breaches the back door, or as I arrive, he goes out the door. I arrive at the back door that we came in, and I stop, and I feel impressed to look back. And I look over my shoulder, and there's a door that I don't know if Nick checked it, but I hadn't checked it. And I feel compelled to go back. So I go back and I open the door. And remember, we're looking for this guy's father. So I'm looking for a grown-up. And I scream into this room, which is a kind of like a half bath, right? And I scream into this probably 6x8 room, no response. And I feel compelled to go all the way in. So I go all the way in, and I look behind the toilet, which is tucked behind a little pony wall. And there's a little girl curled up underneath the toilet, or next to the toilet. So I grab her and stuff her under my arm like a football. And I go out the back, hop the pool fence, and shoot out to the front, set her on the street with her brother. And now the streets have filled up with people. And so Nick and I look at each other, and we run back in the house, and we make a lap of the downstairs one more time, screaming and yelling. And then we're at the bottom of the stairs again, and the front door is right there. And I'll never forget this moment, because the door blasts open, and in steps this giant fireman. And he says, can I swear?
You're good.
He goes, "Get the fuck out." And I'm like, that's probably the right thing to do. Right? What are we doing in here? Right? So Nick and I leave, and we head out to the street, and we're just standing there like with everybody else, with the crowd. And the fire gets put out, and the sheriff's office comes over and takes our story, and this reporter comes over and interviews us. And Nick and I are like, "Wow, this is crazy, man! Like, this is the most unusual experience we've ever had in our life, right?" And the reason I'm telling you this story is because it really it didn't impact me until years later. So we finish up Christmas vacation, we go back to school, right? And we're heading into the second half of our senior year, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you guys are heroes, and this is amazing. You saved that little girl, and that's amazing." And but I really struggle, because at the same time as I'm hearing all that, I find out that the dad had been trapped in a bathroom at the top of the stairs, and he died of smoke inhalation. And so that that family, while we intervened in one way, they lost a major person in their life, right? It was a big, huge loss for them. And I didn't really fully begin to understand the gravity of that event until I started testing for the fire department. Because once I went down that path, I started to realize the impact that we can have in other people's lives. So the mom had been out shopping for Christmas gifts, last minute stuff. You know how moms are. Last minute, I don't even know, food, decorations, gifts, whatever, wrapping paper, who knows. But she had left her 2 kiddos home, one of which lit the curtains on fire and accidentally and ended up killing his dad. I know now, based on my experience as a firefighter and my history, that little girl was totally safe where she was located at. She was downstairs, far from the fire, behind closed doors, and the firefighters were there within minutes, right? And she was totally safe where she was. But that mom sent me a Christmas card every year for about 15 years after that event. And what I take away from that is a deep understanding and appreciation for the fact that all of us are running past each other at 1,000,000 miles a minute every day, everywhere we go. And yet when we take the opportunity to stop and intervene in an incident and serve a member of our community, or serve somebody in our family or a friend or whatever. That is the most important thing. It's the most important thing. And this mom recognized that. And even though, like I said, that little girl was totally safe where she was located at, that's not the point. The point is somebody, these two knuckleheads, Nick and I, took the time to stop and do something. Even though we weren't trained, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. We were risking our lives. We didn't know what we were doing, but we did something. And that's what that family needed. They needed somebody to do something. And so as I began to get into the fire service, that all began to click for me, right? This idea that I wanted to be able to do something for somebody else. I wanted to provide service in the community in some way, shape, or form. It suddenly began to make sense to me and kind of coalesce on the fire service as the place where I could do that and, make a living and take care of my family, but also be able to provide a service in the community that's really quite valuable.
Wow, that's crazy to have that experience. I mean, what are the odds that you don't go on the run that day? And not that, like you said, that little girl wouldn't have been fine or whatever, but that life experience that it gave you, just the butterfly effect kind of that whole situation,
right,
is just crazy really to think about. It's, man, mind blowing, really.
Yeah. And, really interestingly to me is I didn't recognize the impact of that event until years later, right? I went off in the Marine Corps, came out of the Marine Corps, going to school, doing all these different things. And it wasn't until someone said, hey, you can do that for a living, that I looked back at that experience and suddenly began to realize that it really affected me and really anchored in some of what is my purpose in life, what my personal why is for the things that I do. And, I think it's important, to reflect on our life and the things that we've seen and done and the experiences we had, because they really do influence who we are and what we're doing and where we're going. So it's important to really look at those events carefully.
Kind of being aware is definitely important. So, man, there's so much in between that we could talk about, obviously, and you do on your podcast so well, talk about those things, and I would love to talk about them, but we should let's move on to kind of the fitness side of things, or at least the
Sure.
health and fitness side of things. So, obviously you became a firefighter, and you had that sporting background. First of all, you had the military background, but what kind of, I guess, different challenges were there, compared to, from the Marines to being a firefighter, as far as, being physically ready?
I will say this right off the bat. There is a bit of a misconception that you need to be a 6 foot plus, 200 plus pound gorilla to be a successful firefighter. And that is just not the case. So, and that, you do have to be strong. You do have to have some cardio and some metabolic capacity, but you don't need to be a giant, lineman to be successful as a firefighter. It helps with some things, but also being those same guys aren't climbing up in the attics to do overhaul. They can't get up there, right?
Gotcha,
so
right.
it takes a wide variety of people. So one thing I would say to anybody who's listening to this is, if you have any interest in the fire service, explore it. The most important thing is the attitude, the mental attitude. You got to have some mental toughness and a willingness to work in a very difficult and austere environment. That's important as well. So for me, I came into the fire service having been an endurance athlete, and that. I could run really far, but I couldn't jump onto a 12-inch box if you asked me to, right? Because I was very linear in my movements. And so for me, the change was I needed to do some more lifting. And I didn't really figure that out until I was on the job. So I managed to just through my natural physique and capacity, was able to get through the training academy and get through the testing processes just off my basic training that I had done coming into that, right? The body of work I had done preparatory to that, which was really a lot of running, a lot of swimming, and a lot of calisthenics, right? So, once I got onto the job, I transitioned that into a more well-rounded program. So a lot more strength training, but blended with a CrossFit-esque type of metabolic conditioning where you use a little bit of multimodal training. So doing cardio-based stuff with some lightweight, moderate weight, etc. Doing heavy weight, doing power work. So Olympic lifts, sandbag work, doing explosive lifting and things like that. So that became kind of my model over time that I adopted into. And then I would add to that doing a lot of the, we call them skills courses, but putting on our full kit and then going out and moving stuff around, dragging tires, working sledgehammers, learning to, I call it work hardening is a really good way to look at it. You're doing just job specific movements and kind of sport specific type of activities with all your equipment on, so that you're getting the restrictions and the heat that's captured when you're working like that. Really adds a different type of stress to the body.
Gotcha. Yeah. And, if you do go listen to your podcast, you talk a lot about those kinds of things, which is very informative, very good, and not just for firefighting, but if you want to hear about some good fitness stuff as well, it's not just firefighting applicable. It's really functional, if you want to call it that. It's doing kind of life in a way, whatever you're doing in your life, it's going to make you better off when you are more well-rounded. Like you said, having that endurance background is good, but also having some weights, getting stronger, more powerful, things like that, definitely beneficial to be a well-rounded. You talked about, I think, something about how like especially high performing athletes aren't always the healthiest people because they are so trained specifically for something. Sometimes the person that doesn't do it for their paycheck, I guess, in a way, is sometimes more well-rounded, healthier overall person than somebody might think. The super endurance or super weightlifters or whatever it may be, these people are good at what they do, but they're not always the most in shape or the most healthy people out there.
What comes to my mind when a bunch of years ago when my kids were little, I took them to a monster truck show. And those trucks look real tough on the outside. They look all big wheels and monsters painted on the side of them. And then you see those guys toe the line. They're doing little races, and they punch the gas, and almost 50% of those trucks went poof, and they exploded because they're so highly tuned that they're right on the edge of exploding every single time. They're so high power, and it's just one little thing is off and they explode. And that's the single sport athlete that is super highly trained, doesn't have, that is where they're kind of at this super refined moment, right? And this is what's interesting about this with like an endurance athlete. So for myself, when I was training for Ironman, I was training for a day that was going to be in the future. And so I would work my training and rest cycles and my nutrition and my programming was very specific to get me to peak at that one day. And if I was off, it was all blown, right? But I look at firefighting in particular and just life in general. You never know what's going to happen right now, right? I might have to jump off of this chair. This ain't going to happen right now, but my life has always been, hey, I'm sitting at a desk or I'm sitting in a recliner or I'm at the kitchen table and someone yells, hey, go to work. And I got to jump up and I got to go work as hard as I've ever worked in my life right now. So how do you get your body fit and responsive to that type of sudden exertion, right? Or you might be driving your family to the grocery store and somebody jumps out and tries to tackle you or steal something from you, rob you or whatever. And you have to go into a fight for your life. That's the kind of unknowable type of thing that you have to prepare for. I can jump up, get into a bad situation with a bad guy and survive, right? Or I can, any circumstance that you throw at me, I want to be able to be capable in that circumstance. Back a ways, I was racing a 50-mile trail race, and I was doing a very blended type of training. And my longest run prior to this 50-miler was 11 miles, which compared to my previous years, I would run 20 miles and 30 milers preparatory to these big long races. With this blended type of training, I was doing a lot of strength work and a lot of power work, and I was more durable. I ran my personal best at that event. So for me, that works, right? And I think for firefighting, that the diversity of training is really important, because you just don't know. You go into a fire and it is super hot, it's wet, it's slippery, it's dark, there's unstable surfaces. You're working overhead sometimes with pike poles and tools trying to pull ceiling down, and you're working in all kinds of strange planes. You have to be functional. All those things require a wide capacity,
especially obviously, as a first responder, because you don't know. It's not like any other thing to where it's a scheduled, okay, we know something's going to happen and we're going to have to do something here. We know tomorrow we're going to have to do this type of thing. So yeah, like you said, you always have to be ready. And big part of that, obviously, is a wide range of just different exercises, different workouts, keeping your body, pushing your body to limits to certain points, and having a good plan.
Yeah. So the one thing I would say that you kind of touched on is that multimodal training doesn't mean it's random, right? You absolutely have to have a plan. It has to be progressive and measurable, and you have to be cognizant of what you're doing, right? So, that being said, I would say there needs to be you need to have a strength program, a power program, and a metabolic conditioning program. And I don't, or you can call it cardio, whatever you want to call it, but those things need to be kind of working in concert. Now, if you want to do a strength cycle where you're just focused on strength, absolutely. But do that for a number of weeks, but have a plan in place. Because if you're just going to show up at the gym and go, well, today I'm going to deadlift, right? Or today I'm going to ride the bike. That's not going to get you where you need to go. You need to actually have some structure to it and build a plan. The way I like to do it for firefighters is, in my neck of the woods, we work every third day. So I would do 2 on and 1 off. So 2 days of training, 1 day off. And I would, depending on how busy your station is or whatever, I would always work out right in the morning as I was coming into work, and in the morning when I was leaving work, or if I could work out during the day, I would work out during the day. And then I would take my first day off as a rest day, because that oftentimes you come off a shift and you're just completely smoked. And that's an important part of, when we talk about firefighting specifically, the health and wellness of firefighters, this piece is really important. We get a lot of sleep deprivation. So firefighters go in, the day is like this. You just never know what the day is going to bring. And typically you're up 2 or 3 times or 4 times after midnight running medical calls or fires or what have you. And the next morning you're just completely smoked. You need to give your body an opportunity to recover, right? So, and we're talking about the long game here, right? The infinite game. And I know I keep referring to my would-be grandchildren, right? That's what I'm talking about, this long game. If you're going to survive the course of a career, if you're going to survive your whole entire life, you got to be thinking long range. And so you can't, when it comes to training, it's the same thing. It's progressive. You got to build rest in. Rest is so important. And people overlook that. They're like, I'm going to go to the gym every single day. Well, if you don't give your body a chance to recover, then you're just going to break down. And you're opening yourself up to immunosuppression and disease processes, as well as just common colds, right? Coronavirus or whatever. You're opening yourself up to those things. Whereas the benefit of staying healthy and training, that you're going to build those things up if you allow yourself to rest and recover properly. So those are some important fundamental concepts of training that have to be adhered to in this particular model as well.
The rest is a very important aspect that, because I think fitness is so big on social media, the rest side of things is very neglected. So, we definitely have to emphasize the rest side. It's almost glorified to not rest, to be, I want to go hard all the time. I want to,
Right.
I want to push myself to the limit all the time, which it's fine to push yourself, but you have to, set yourself up smartly for that kind of all out work. So yeah, definitely. The rest side is important.
I'm a huge advocate of going into the pain cave and really taking yourself to your physical capacity, right? But you can't do that every single day. That is a recipe for failure, because you're not going to get the progression that you want. You're going to sustain it for a little while, and then you're going to fall apart, right? And so that model has to be, measured, and you're calculating your dosing of exercise in an appropriate way. Should it be uncomfortable? Yes, but not not soul crushingly uncomfortable every single time, right? It
Absolutely.
needs to be progressive, and you're building on something here. So that's important. But, and I also like the idea that I would sprinkle in there is doing things that you don't normally do. So like I went through a phase where I was trying to learn how to do handstands, right? Just trying to learn how to move in a different way, and that just, I never really mastered it. I need to get back on that, but it's one of those things that, there's different things you can learn how to do that are great opportunities for skills development and teaching your body how to move in the world.
Keeping it somewhat, fresh and fun is definitely a very important aspect to it. I think it is something that a lot of people never experience. So in the best way you can explain it to somebody who has never been in that situation, what is it like to actually go into willingly a burning building?
Okay, so first of all, have you seen the movie Backdraft?
I don't think so.
Okay, I might be dating myself. Ladder 49, was it Chicago Fire? Okay, anything you've seen on television or in the movies, 100% inaccurate.
Okay.
The period. Okay, so First of all, this disclaimer right there. That is inaccurate. It is. I described him. Started trying to figure out the best way. So when I described you that house fire I ran into earlier, right? The downstairs was light haze, and it was a lot like you burn bacon or something in your house. It was just this smoke throughout the house. But when I went up the stairs and when I looked up, there's a roaring sound. Imagine a campfire 100-fold, right? This fire is just churning and ripping and consuming the products in the house, the gases, etc., are all on fire. It's pitch black with thick, viscous black smoke. So a lot of times when you go into a house fire, there's multiple different environments that you're going to find yourself in, right? There's the one with the light smoke where you can see just fine. There's also the exact opposite where the smoke is so wicked thick that you can't see your hand in front of your face. And that environment will change. And you would think to yourself, oh, there's fire and everything. But the products of that in your house right now that you have laying around, all the furniture and the clothing and all the tchotchkes you have around your house, most of them are made with plastics. And those plastics put off a very, very toxic and thick smoke gas product, which is smoke, which is just gas, and with particulates and elements in it, oils and stuff that are clinging in those in that smoke. So it's an incredibly toxic environment, which I think it's 85% of fatalities in fires are due to smoke inhalation, because it is just such a toxic gas that's in there. And it is, the other thing I would add is it's very, very hot. So while you see firefighters with all that equipment on, you feel the heat penetrating your equipment. And it's really important that environment can get very, very hot, upwards of 1,000 degrees very quickly. So we go in there. That's why we take hoses with us, right? Because we got to go in there and start cooling that environment and changing the atmosphere to make it more survivable and more tenable. But you can absolutely feel the heat pushing through your equipment as it's working its way in there, because your gear has a limit and it'll eventually be saturated. So to answer your question more succinctly, it's incredibly dark, it's incredibly hot, and the environment can change in a nanosecond.
The physics and the chemistry that go along with, a fire and how it evolves, how it changes and all that stuff is very interesting to me. It's not just, hey, let's go, bring the hoses and spray the fire down and we'll be, see you in half an hour or something. So
right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We joke in the fire service a lot. And we say, just put the wet stuff on the red stuff, right? Like it's that simple, but it's a little bit not, right? It's a little bit more technical than that, right? Because just as a silly example, the minute you open a door, you're introducing oxygen into the fire compartment potentially, right? Depends on where the fire is located, depends on what other windows and doors in the structure are open, and you're creating airflow. And fire builds the heat and the gases build pressure. So there's a whole dynamic that takes place when you open a door. You create a low pressure environment, and that high pressure has to go somewhere. So the gases flow and can create their own I'll call it wind, I guess, but the gases are moving. So it creates this airflow. So it is, earlier on in the podcast, I said, not only do you have to be, brawny, but you got to be smart. and you got to be willing to learn. That's one thing in the fire service. I say all the time, right? Firemen hate change in the way it is. And that's because change is constantly happening. Like we're in the time that, when your dad was a volunteer fireman, I don't know what year he did that, but we'll just say back in the day. So like, let's go 70s and 80s. The fires that he had, and that the firefighters of old had, were made out of grandma's furniture, which is wood and cotton and natural fibers, right? And now today, everything in your house is made out of synthetics. And those synthetics burn very, very hot, very, very fast, and leave a tremendous amount of toxic gases in the atmosphere that are unburned, because they need more oxygen to be able to burn cleanly. I won't get into it much more than that. But the point being is these fires are way more volatile than they were 30, 40 years ago. And so, the point of that is firefighters have to adapt and change and are learning new ways of doing things in order to be safer and more effective. And for somebody who is not a firefighter, the lesson that you need to take away from that is when you go to bed at night, sleep with your doors closed, because a hollow core door can save your life in the event of a fire in your home somewhere. And I know people are uncomfortable with that because it feels like it cuts them off from their kids and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, if you want to protect your family, close your doors. Really, really important component of firefighting and firefighter safety for the homeowner.
Interesting. Yeah. Something else I think you mentioned on one of your podcasts was the open floor plan, and how that's, very dangerous as well.
Yeah. So modern houses are wide open, right? Versus the 70s and houses of the 70s and 80s are all very compartmentalized, and you get a fire in the kitchen, it's a small little kitchen, it's contained, and not anymore. Everything's wide open and things spread really fast. Those gases flow right through your house.
Yeah, definitely.
It's an interesting, the idea of fire dynamics and fire science, and we've been working. I say we, but the fire services, UL and NIST, National Institute of Safety and Technology, are doing all kinds of research to look at how fires burn compared to the old days, because things have changed so dramatically. So, excuse me, you're gonna probably see a different approach to firefighting in the future, and different technologies and things like that, which are all fantastic. The one of the things that's a real bummer, you're probably hearing a lot more now, just in the general public, about cancer in the fire service, and that's because the materials that are burning, like I said, are all spun hydrocarbons, and those hydrocarbons are absolutely toxic and are carcinogens. And so we're seeing the rates of firefighter cancer go through the roof. All types of cancers, from skin cancer to I can't think of any all of a sudden now. Why all of a sudden are firefighters getting more and more cancers? And it's because of the way fires, the combustibles have changed. The products that we have in our homes are changed. They're different now than they ever once were.
That's crazy, because most people do associate the risk of being a firefighter is dying in a building, or which obviously is a thing that could happen. But when you think about it becoming, cancer becoming the number one killer is just crazy. So kind of explain, I know we kind of did with the the chemicals and what things are being made of now, but kind of explain, what the fire service and other industries are trying to do to kind of help.
Yeah. So it's interesting is we are having to respond in the aftermath of this, right? Recognizing that this is a problem. We can't change the products that are burning, so we have to respond to it in a different way. So some of the things we're doing are really simple. When firefighters go into a fire, in the olden days, they would go in, put the fire out, and then they would take off some of their equipment to begin mucking out the house, right? And cleaning up some of the debris in the aftermath. What we've discovered is that even once the fire's out, there's a tremendous amount of gases that are still permeating the air and circulating around inside those environments. So what we're doing now is we're having our firefighters keep their self-contained breathing apparatus on all the way through the event, right? Keeping their gear on, their coat on, and et cetera, to keep as much of the particulates off of their skin and as much of the gases from getting into their lung tissue. So another thing that we're having folks do is when they come out of the fire, they don't disconnect the regulator. They stay on their self-contained air, and they immediately go over and we do kind of I call it a gross decon. They knock off all the big stuff. So they get water and they just clean off, hose off the big stuff on the outside of their gear. And they found that actually really reduces the amount of carcinogens that are off-gassing from their equipment significantly. Another thing that we're having firefighters do is they immediately bag their equipment. So they take it off, they put it in trash bags and tie a knot in it. And then they go back to the station and immediately take showers. So we're getting them out of the environment, so basically just trying to reduce the amount of exposure time. One thing about firefighting that is kind of interesting is you'll go home and days later you'll take a shower and you'll smell the gases coming off your skin, the smell of smoke. And I remember early on in my career, I was like, oh yeah, 3 days ago, that was awesome, right? Like you had this great fire. And now I'm like, crap, it's still in me, right? Get that crap out of me, because it's not good for your body, right? We're realizing that. So there's all kinds of research that's going on, looking into ways to get those gases out of the body. We find that it permeates, it gets caught in the subcutaneous fat and all that kind of stuff, and it's in the liver, and it's all throughout the body. So they're working on different ways to, there's scientists out there and researchers who are looking at how better to build the turnout coats to better protect from the permeation of the smoke and gases into the getting it from the skin. And then there's other folks working on how to be healthier on the back end. So those types of procedures, I'm probably missing something. The other thing is we take equipment and get it laundered as quickly as possible. So we take those turnouts, they send them off to, some people have private companies, some fire departments. In my neck of the woods, we have our own machines. So the equipment goes down and goes through giant washing machines. They call them extractors, but they're just big, huge industrial washing machines. Your gear gets cleaned and then gets sent back. It smells all fresh and, lemony and nice. So that's some of the stuff that they're doing right now, and they're continuing to work on the technology to try to improve on all those different steps that we're taking to improve on that.
And it kind of reminds me of almost like a secondhand smoke kind of situation in a way. I mean, obviously on a much larger scale, but when you said just kind of how you can smell it on you, days later. And luckily I didn't grow up with anybody in my house that smoked, but some of my family did. And, we would go over there for Christmas, whatever it might be, Thanksgiving, but you just leave. And then you can smell it on you. You can smell it in your hair, on your skin, on your clothing. And it's just like, man, this is and then when you throw onto it a whole like burning house, I can only imagine, all the craziness that would, be involved in that type of, bigger situation. It's kind of just insane to think about, really.
Yeah. What's really interesting is, I told you they take their gear off, bag it, and then take it home and get it washed right away. Right. What we normally do, what we have done for years historically was you would take your gear off and hang it on a hook right there in the truck. And then you drive around the rest of the shift, doing all kinds of stuff, running errands, running medical calls, doing whatever. And your gear is sitting there off-gassing all these toxins into the cab of the truck. And, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? We didn't realize what was happening. And so the industry is coming up with some other things too. They're doing some things called clean cabs, where the turnouts are not kept in the cab, they're kept in a compartment. And this will change some of our response times and the paradigm of our responses, the way that we respond, et cetera. So, but if we can keep our firefighters healthy, that's important. So that's a lot of changes like that. But I promise you, firefighters will still show up and put out your fire, right? So that's the most important part of that. We are definitely going to come and we're going to put your fire out and do everything in our power to keep you out of harm's way. And then we're going to try and take care of ourselves on the back end by cleaning our gear and ourselves, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important thing to think about and remember, is that, just because you're calling for someone to help you doesn't mean that the person that's showing up still doesn't deserve to be safe as well. I think an overlooked part of public service is the people that come and help you, whether that be, police, fire, EMS, whoever it is, their life is just as important as the person that, you're trying to save. And, why put more lives in danger? To an extent, yes, it's your job to, be in that situation, but it's also not a great word to use, but a fair situation to put more lives at risk, even though in that one moment it might not be, but down the road, it's definitely, you have to think big picture.
Yeah. Hey, that's a really interesting point, right? Because we we who took on the mantle of responsibility for fire protection, right? Our responsibility is to show up with a vast set of skills and capacity and knowledge to be able to mitigate emergencies. That's our response. That's my responsibility. But it's also my responsibility to get there safely, right? And to be able to continue to respond safely. Because if our firefighters are dead, then they can't do the job. So we had to do everything in our power to be able to respond effectively and efficiently, and be healthy and capable of doing that job. So, it's like there's lots of changes that we've seen in the fire service. Like back in the day, they used to ride on the tailboard, and they realized, hey, that is not the safest way to travel, right? Firefighters got hurt, accidents happen, people get thrown from the truck, traffic's gotten busier, etc. So we put people inside the cab and put them in seatbelts, right? And there's lots of changes like that may affect our response a little bit. The way we respond, it's just different. It's not less, it's not any worse. The best thing that we can do is show up with a robust set of skills, a broad knowledge base, and a great capacity for work, and then go and get after it.
Maybe just a few minutes here to talk about the diet nutrition side of things. I know it can be a deep and dark subject to go into, but how do you kind of handle that?
Well, let me just say this. Everybody knows firemen like to eat good, right? They like to cook. They like to eat good. And that, when I first got on the job, my wife and I, we were at a party one day, and she says to some friends, oh, I have a 5-year plan. And I'm like, what's the 5-year plan? She says, oh, within 5 years, I will not cook anymore in our household. Because I was coming home, guess what I learned today? And I was whipping up the lasagnas and enchiladas and all kinds of cool stuff, right? So the fire service has evolved. When I first got on the job, we ate really heavy, really fat foods. And, we have gotten a lot more savvy in the last 20 plus years about nutrition. And, you're seeing a lot more salads, a lot more thoughtful consideration for the food that we're eating, chicken and vegetables. And you'll see grilled beef and red meats and stuff, but it's prepared with veggies and stuff like that. So people are being a lot more thoughtful about it. Me personally, I feel like diet is an experiment of one. So when you're talking about, you can eat to just eat because the food is delicious, or you can eat in a way that is targeted toward your performance. And so that is really individualized. So, I've tinkered with paleo, I've tinkered with intermittent fasting, I've tinkered with keto, and all in with the objective of how can I perform well, and is my lean body mass going to be the way I want it to be? Now, this in the context of growing old is really an interesting set of experiments, because our bodies are always changing. And what I did when I was 20 does not work now that I'm 49, almost 50. My wife reminds me all the time, right? So that you have to be mindful, I think, as an individual, that the reason it's such a trap for people is because everything works differently for individuals. And your body's metabolism and the way in which you process food, carbs, energy, whatever, all those different elements, macros and stuff like that, it's different for everybody. So you got to be willing as an individual, this is my assertion, you have to be willing to experiment a little bit and be thinking and listening to your body. What's my body telling me? What did I eat that's not working so well? What do I have the energy I need to be successful in my workouts? Am I feeling good? Do I feel good? And if you're not feeling good, then you got to do something different. I think an interesting component of this is people are always looking to somebody else for what to do. And I would say the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is that we are honest with ourselves, right? At the end of the day, you look at, if you're tracking your food and you're like, I wrote down all these foods and, I didn't write down that cookie that I slipped in there. Like, hey man, if you're not going to be honest with yourself, then I don't know what to tell you. You are going to be unsuccessful, and you're going to nobody can change that for you if you're not honest with yourself about it.
You can lie to MyFitnessPal, you can lie to your food diary, whatever it is, but it's going to come out whether you're sticking to it or not. The
100%.
The progress you make is based on the steps you take. So, regardless of what you write down or say you've done or, put put on social media that you're doing. It doesn't matter. It's all going to come down to what you're actually doing. So yeah,
exactly. People are really passionate about certain things. And I think it's got a lot to do with ego. You get on a hook and you're like, oh, paleo, man, this is the and it works for you, man. I have a couple friends who do paleo and they're super shredded and they look fantastic. And really it's more about their ability to stick to a disciplined pattern of eating that has a little bit of calorie reduction, has some healthy whole foods. I think that's, if I were to summarize a diet that I think is really good for people, is eat whole foods. That's it.
Yeah. It's so basic yet so, simple, not easy, but like you have to just look at what you're putting in your body. And obviously the processed food isn't great. The high sugar stuff isn't great. So just and on the most basic level, I think almost everybody knows what they should be eating.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I really appreciate sharing some time today with us. And it was really good to get to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and for plugging the podcast and for being a listener. That's at least one of us, one person listening. So that's awesome. Exactly. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And yeah, I really enjoy, I love talking about all this stuff. So man, thanks so much for having me on, and hopefully your audience appreciates it and enjoys it. And
yeah, I think they will. I think, people appreciate it, especially, when they see somebody that's in the public service and that gives back to the community. I think they can really appreciate that. And they like hearing, those stories because it's inspirational to them. And it's somebody that, it brings hope to them. And so they can, they want to try, they want to, do better. And that's kind of, I think why I also like listening to your podcast, because, you inspire me to want to do these things and learn about different things. And, just the lessons and messages in your own podcast kind of inspired me to want to, bring you on here and spread that even a little bit further.
Right on, man. Well, I would say the same thing. I appreciate that your podcast talking about fitness and broadening people's perspective of what's out there and what they can, ways that they can frame their thinking about it, I think is really important, because people need to expand that thought process. That's an important piece. So I'm glad, good on you for doing that.
Appreciate it.
Right on.
Alrighty, that is the podcast. Thank you for joining us today in the weight room. Amazing conversation with Rayne. Go check out his podcast, Fireground Fitness. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and I'm sure a lot of other places as well. That link will be down in the description. So once again, go check that out. And you don't have to be, in the fire service or whatever to appreciate the podcast. It's a lot of it is fitness, a lot of it is health, a lot of it is diet. And then a lot of it's just some cool stories from a lot of people who have a lot of cool experiences in life. So, go check that one out, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. And do the same thing for the weight room. Really appreciate all the support there. Subscribe, rate, review. Until next time, we're out.